So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along to this online presentation, which is about leadership, but specifically it's about leadership when there's a lot of change happening. There's a lot of disruption, uncertainty, chaos, crisis, change. And of course, that's what many of us are going through at the moment. So what I want to do is in the next 45 minutes, share some ideas about how to lead. Lead your team, lead your organization, if you're a leader in your community, and even around personal leadership. So how do you lead in times when there's change and uncertainty? So let me start with my 3 standard rules of engagement for all my presentations. So I always like to say that I want to give you something to think about. So take this opportunity, take this 45 minutes to turn off your phone, put on silent, look at whatever you can do to avoid any other interruption and distractions, and take this time to think. And I always say it's better to think big now and think a little bit broader than you normally would in your normal day-to-day life, because it's easier to do that. And if you then have to step that back later when the world takes over, it's much easier to do that way than the other way around, than to just think small now and then try to expand your thinking when the world hits you when you log off from here. Be a bit playful. So there will be an opportunity for you to please ask questions as you go along, and I will stop and answer your questions. I will also ask you questions as we go, and I'll ask you there'll be some polls, there'll be the chance for you to share ideas with each other as well. So go all in. You'll get more value from it, and everybody in the room will get more value from it as well. But I really do want to give you some really practical actions that you can take away and use. So today's a little bit about strategy. So we are thinking a little bit long term, but it's not only long term. I want to also give you some practical ways to get started in taking some action, making some decisions and taking some action in uncertainty starting now. So it's not just abstract theory and big picture strategy. Looking at the people who are here, I know a lot of people already know me, but for those who don't, my name is Gihan Pereira. I'm a futurist. I work a lot with the leaders and leaders at all levels of all organizations. Just here's a sample of some of the clients I've worked with at a leadership level, and I'm sharing this to show you that it's leaders at all levels. So there's large government organizations, they're private companies, some of them are small, some of them are large multinationals, some of them are local, and as leaders we're all facing similar issues and challenges now, especially as a result of the disruption that's been caused by COVID-19. Now, not everybody has been affected equally by it, and we'll get to that pretty soon, and that applies not just across organizations, but it applies across industries. As we know, in Australia, different states are being affected differently at the moment, and globally we're also being affected differently. So let's get into that, and we'll get into that soon. I shared this in the last presentation that I ran, this idea of the Avocado Leader. So this is based on some research that was done by Macquarie University in the middle of last year. So about a year ago, they did some research and they looked at leaders, CEOs of Australian organizations. And they looked at the ones who were being the most effective, who were actually the ones who were the most effective leaders, even in a time of crisis and change. And what they found was, and they coined this term, the Avocado Leader. So the Avocado Leader is like, it's a metaphor for, you have this hard inner core, which is all about performance and objectives and meeting KPIs and making sure you're profitable. But you've also got this soft outer layer, which is the people side of things. And the best leaders have always been avocado leaders, because that it's people who drive your performances and profitability and profits. But in a crisis, they're more important than ever, because I think a crisis doesn't create leaders, it amplifies them. And at times, normal times, we kind of tolerate mediocre or okay leaders because they're not great, but they don't seem to do much harm, and it's harder to get rid of them than to just keep going with them and just tolerate them and maybe work around them. But in a crisis, those kind of leaders, they're the ones who are really exposed by the crisis. And so we need more of this avocado leadership. So last month, I know some people here were at my presentation last month, and last month's presentation was around the people side of things, the soft outer layer of avocado leadership. Today, it's also about people, but today we're looking more at the hard inner core. So how do you lead to achieve your objectives, even in crisis and change and uncertainty? Okay, so that's a little bit of a frame of what's coming. So we've got lots of people joining today. If you didn't attend last month's presentation, that's okay. You haven't really, there's nothing that you've missed that you absolutely need, but that is available if you go to gihanpereira.com, and you can look at the recording of last month's presentation as well after today. There are about 50 people who have registered for this one who were also there at last month's one, and I'm making sure that I'm not going to repeat anything except for this first bit, which I'm going to do now, which is a little bit of a puzzle that I asked last month, and so that was leading into today. So this is good. This is the link between them. So the puzzle is this. So we've got these 4 companies, and my question to you is, what do these 4 companies have in common? So before I share with you what those 4 companies are, if you did attend last month and you know the answer, just hold back a bit, let the other people have a go first. But if you don't know and you're just guessing, please go ahead and guess. So what do these 4 companies have in common? So the first one's Groupon. So the like a marketing and promotions company in Australia. Scoopon is probably a bigger version than Groupon, although we do have Groupon as well. This is Slack. So Slack is like a replacement for email, one of the fastest growing companies in the world a few years ago, and it provides team collaboration for enterprises, for workplaces. Uber, of course, we know because of its ride sharing and a whole bunch of other services that Uber offers, and WhatsApp, which is a communication app, a very large communication app. So what do those 4 companies have in common? So just type in the chat, what do you think those 4 companies have in common? By the way, there's more than one correct answer to this, and typically when I ask people, they would say things like they're all digital, they all work online, I can see coming in, they're all people-oriented, they're all web-based, so these are all true. Somebody else said these are all companies that have no assets themselves, like Uber doesn't own taxis, but it provides essentially a taxi service. They're disruptors in the industry, James says. Rachel says innovative replacements for conventional services. One of my clients, a senior leader at one of Australia's large companies, she said these are all things that my Gen Z kids can't do without. So yes, that's true as well. Anything else? Anyone want to jump in? Even the people who know the answer from last month, if you want to jump in. And so all of these are correct, but there's one specific answer that I'm looking for here. Okay, let me tell you one other thing that these 4 companies have in common. They were all founded during the GFC, during the global financial crisis, more than a decade ago. And, the GFC, like in Australia, we were generally shielded pretty well from it, but it really hit North America and Europe really hard. In fact, in the US, they called it the Great Recession because it was a massive disruption to society and the economy there. And the reason I'm sharing this example and these examples of companies that were founded in the GFC is you might think it takes a lot of courage to start a company during a crisis. But actually, in some ways, it's easier to do that because the crisis has done a lot of that disruption for you. See, when things are going well in normal times, people tend to, as I said before, go along with what's okay. They say we're happy with, we're not necessarily happy with our jobs, but it's okay, it's an income and that's what we care about. We may not like our boss or we may not like our team members, but again, it's a little bit too hard to change them. We may not like our suppliers, but we've already got those processes in place. It's too hard to change. But in a crisis, all bets are off. You start reevaluating everything that's important to you. You start reevaluating all your connections, all your network. And so it's easier for organizations to be disrupted by these smart, savvy startups who come in and they don't have to knock on the door anymore because the crisis has already pushed the door open and knocked down the walls. So just be careful. So if you're not one of these smart startup entrepreneurs, just be aware that even if you think that you've weathered COVID reasonably well as an organization, or maybe even as an industry, just be aware that you might be a little bit more vulnerable now. It's like when you're driving along, if a pebble hits your windscreen and it doesn't shatter it, but it just puts a little crack in it, that's not dangerous in itself. But the real danger is the next pebble that comes across, that will probably shatter your windscreen because the first one has weakened it. That's why in many states around Australia, it's illegal to drive around with a tiny crack in your windscreen, because we know that it's the second one that's going to be the real danger. So just be aware of that when we're talking about crisis and disruption and change, that you may feel that you're reasonably safe, but the world has changed around us. So I want to share with you 3 ways that as leaders, if we're leading our teams through this change and disruption and uncertainty, there are 3 things that you can do to work more effectively. And I'll fill in these 3 things as we go. The trap, let me tell you the trap that many people fall into when they're dealing with change and uncertainty. The trap is to think smaller, because you can only see a little bit further ahead. So we'll make our goals shorter, we'll make our plans smaller. And that's a trap, because it means that you're always being reactive and you won't be able to face competition from people who are being a little bit more medium term or long term in their thinking. Okay. So let me tell you a story about my Cocker Spaniel, Jessie. She's no longer with us. She passed away a few years ago. So this story is a few years ago. We used to take her for a run in a local park near where I live. And you can see here that around the park, actually let me zoom this in for you, there are these signs around the park. It's a dog park, but only part of it is available for dogs off their leash. So you can see the sign that says, in the blue part, which is in the south end of the park, you can let your dog off their leash. But in the red part, which is further, the bigger part of the park, dogs are allowed, but they have to be on the leash. And there are these signs all around the park. But between the blue and the red area, there's no fence, there's no gate, and Jessie can't read. So, of course, we let her off the leash in the blue area, and she runs all over the park. And I think this is what's happened to our world now. And like I've been telling this story for almost 10 years now, talking about potential disruption. And of course, in the last 2 years, we've all experienced it. And this is what's happened. The dogs are off their leash now, and there's no way that we can bring them back in. So we have to be able to operate in this time where we're going to be constantly in change and uncertainty and disruption. And that's going to keep changing, but it's going to change in different ways for different organizations and different industries. In the last decade, I've worked with businesses and industries who have experienced other kinds of disruption in financial services, in aged care, any sort of regulated industry like healthcare, and they're facing disruption. And it's always been the case. It's just different now because it's happening to all of us at the same time. So what can we do about it? Okay, so let's do the first area. So the first of the 3 things I want to cover today is just accepting the idea that we're going to have more uncertainty in our lives. And I'll share with you some scientific research that was done about the way that we deal with uncertainty. But before we do that, let's do a poll. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick poll here, and the poll question is, how well do you deal with uncertainty? In fact, there are 4 questions in the poll. It's how well you deal with uncertainty individually, certainty or uncertainty, and then how well your team deals with certainty and uncertainty. So there are 2 ways that you could do the poll. There's the old-fashioned way and the new-fashioned way. So the old-fashioned way is you can just go to, pull out your phone, and then in your web browser, just go to askgihan.com. You could do that. That's the old-fashioned way. And the newer way is using a QR code. In fact, it's not that new. Like QR codes have been around since the 1990s, but they've only become mainstream in Australia in the last year or so because of COVID-19. But many people don't know that the latest iPhones and Android phones actually have QR code scanning built in to the camera app. So this is not to do with COVID scanning, by the way. You still need that special app for that. But normally, if you see a QR code anywhere, you can pull out your phone, hold it up to the QR, open the camera, hold it up to the QR code, and it'll take you to that page, askgihan.com. So would you like to do that? So either of the 2 ways, you could either type it in askgihan.com in Google or Safari, or try it with the QR code. Hold up your phone to the camera app, go to scan the QR code, and if it doesn't work, it might mean that you haven't quite got the latest version of the software. That's okay. Just go to askgihan.com, and we'll see what's happening with the poll. So some people have answered already. I'll leave that up there for about 5 more seconds to give you another chance to go there. And let me bring that up for you so you can see the results as they're happening. Okay, right, interesting. Okay, so we'll keep it up there for a little bit. I can see how many people have voted, so I'll just leave it open for another 10 seconds because people are still voting. The numbers are going up. Okay, so it's reasonably stable. Okay, so this is what's happened, right? So you can say most people feel like you look at the first and the third of those scores. So I operate well when the future's known, yeah, like 4 out of 5. And my team operates well when the future's known, yeah, 3.5 to 4 out of 5. But in both of those, they're a little bit lower when you talk about uncertainty. I operate well when the future's uncertain, it's come down a bit, and my team operates well, it's come down a bit as well. So typically, this is what I've found. And I've run this survey for the last, 5 years or so with various leadership teams. And let me show you something really interesting that's happened since COVID. And actually, it's not only just since COVID, it's people who've been through disruption. So we saw what we as a group voted on today, and we assessed ourselves. This is an example. It's very similar to many of the groups that I dealt with before the start of last year. So you can see here that if you look at the top 2 lines, they say, yes, I'm pretty good in certainty and uncertainty. But just as like today, when I did it, after COVID, the numbers changed a bit. They went down dramatically. So we realized that we're actually not so good as we thought when we actually plunged into crisis and plunged into uncertainty. So this is for many people, it's a new experience. And we all know this, like it's a once in a century pandemic, but it then means that we still have to operate effectively in that time. So how do we do that? And there's some science that kind of supports this. So these researchers, social psychologists, did this research, and they set up this experiment where they had people come in to a room and they were playing a video game, kind of a puzzle. I don't know how they recruited these volunteers, because what they got them to do was they said, there are these stones, these rocks, on the screen, and you can use your mouse to turn over the rocks, and behind some of the rocks, under some of the rocks, there are some snakes, and under some others there's nothing. I've used friendly looking snakes just in case anyone has a snake phobia. You're welcome. But the point is that if there were snakes, they rigged up the system so that if there was a snake, if they turned over a rock with a snake, it would give them a mild electric shock, right? And so that was it. So you're trying to avoid the snakes. So what they could do, the experimenters could change the experiment in 2 ways. One is, so this is at level 1, then level 2, you see the same rocks, and one of 2 things was different. Either there were more snakes under the rocks, so some of the empty rocks had a snake under them this time around, or they're the same number of snakes, but they'd moved around. And what the researchers found, what the experimenters found, was that the participants were more stressed and more anxious when the snakes had moved around, when there was uncertainty. So they went up to level 2 and now it was uncertain. Whereas if they went up to level 2 and they knew there were some more snakes, they didn't mind as much because they knew where the previous snakes were. So we're much more comfortable with certainty, even if we know the certainty is negative or there's some pain attached to it, rather than having uncertainty. We're hardwired to avoid uncertainty. And so that's why a lot of people just feel stressed and anxious now because of the uncertainty, not because of the disaster and the crisis, but simply because their world and their future is more uncertain. So as leaders, obviously, we need to be aware of that. John Cleese, in his movie Clockwise, this is one of the lines from the script. He says, look, I can take the despair. It's a hope that I can't stand, right? So people don't like having their hopes dashed. So As leaders, we need to be able to lead our teams in this time of great uncertainty. And obviously, if we had control of it, if we knew that we could control our future because it only depends on us or our organization, then we can offer our teams more certainty. But generally, we can't. We're not in the position that we can just offer certainty. Sometimes there's a lot more uncertainty as well. So the first thing I want to share with you, apart from just accepting the idea that there's more uncertainty, is figure out where you are. So where are you now in this progression of crisis, recovery, and growth? And what I mean by that is generally, like when COVID first hit, everyone went into crisis mode. So like office workers, generally reasonably lucky because all they had to do was figure out how to work from home. But in crisis mode, you kind of drop everything, you figure out what you need to do to sort out the crisis. It's like if you're going through a storm and you've got a hole in your boat, all you're trying to do is bail out water and fix the hole. You're not really worrying about what direction you're steering in. Then you move into recovery, where you're coming out of crisis, but you haven't quite got back to normal yet. And then after that, then you can move into growth. So just, I'm going to do a little bit more around this, but if I can ask you, just in the chat, where do you think your business, your organization, or your team is? So whatever level you are in terms of leadership, look at your team that you're leading, or your business or your organization. Where are you at the moment? Are you in crisis, recovery, and growth? Just share in the chat. And there's some industries that are fully in crisis at the moment. The travel industry is still in this crisis. There's nothing that you can do if you're in travel until we open international borders, for example. Okay, so I'm seeing some people say, quite a few people say they're in recovery, which is good to see. Recovery heading to growth. Good. Yeah, travel industry in crisis. Yes, growth. Crisis, yep. Yeah, okay, so there is a range and it's across the board, right? One really important thing to understand is that this is true not only for a business and an industry, but it's true for individuals as well. So there may be people in your team who, like your team may be in recovery or maybe in growth, but there may be people in your team who are still going through crisis. And it may not be for themselves. It may be that they've got a partner who's lost their job. It could be that they're worried about elderly parents catching COVID. It could be that they're working in a really cramped environment at home, whereas other people don't have that. They might be looking after school kids who are trying to learn from home. They might still feel like they're in crisis, even though the rest of the team, the rest of the business, the rest of the organization might not be the same. And vice versa, of course. So here's something I suggest that we think about when you're thinking about where people are on this progression from crisis to recovery to growth. See, I reckon if you think about performance and time, it typically goes like this. In crisis, there's a big dip. Then when you reach the bottom, you start moving out through recovery. It might take a while. It might be really fast. And then you start moving into growth. What typically happens is when you're in crisis, it's easy to be, and you have to be, reactive. You just have to, as I said, bail out the water so the boat doesn't sink. The next thing that happens when you start getting into recovery, you can start being, you're still not fully out of the crisis, but at least you can be now a bit more responsive. So you're not just reacting to what's happening outside. You can predict a little bit ahead, and so you can plan to be a bit more responsive. And then when you get to growth, which is ideal, then you can start being proactive. And typically what happens is most organizations go through those three phases. They go from crisis to recovery. So you start going from reactive to responsive, and then responsive to proactive. Now, you can do that very quickly, or you can do that slowly. In fact, there are two things that I recommend. Oh, there's one other thing. There's some organizations like those startups who say, here's an opportunity. Out of crisis, let's be the disruptor in our industry. Let's be the Uber that takes over and disrupts the taxi industry, or the Airbnb that disrupts accommodation. Okay, so you can do that, but most organizations don't do that. And I reckon if you can be proactive before you need to be, so if you can start being proactive earlier, then you're a little bit ahead of the game. And the same the other way. If you can start being responsive earlier, you're a little bit ahead of the game. Okay, so just be aware of that when you're looking at where your team is now and where your leadership is now, that there's some things that especially the things we're going to talk about in the next half hour or so, that some of the things you can't do if you're in crisis. If your team's in crisis, then it's very hard to say we need to be proactive because we just can't. We still need to keep the boat afloat, keep it above water. Okay, so that's the first thing to be aware of. Just know where you are, whether you're in crisis, recovery, or growth, and keep in mind that the rest of your team might not be at the same level as you are individually, and the individuals who are going through this at a different pace. Any questions? Any questions or comments about this? Just make that there. There's some people who are saying, personally, I'm in growth. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And is anyone who's disruptive, who's saying, here's a great opportunity, let's roll up our sleeves and let's disrupt our industry? I know a few people who are doing that. I know a couple of clients who are talking about doing that. I won't say who they are because they've got big ideas in saying that we have been slow and lumbering and we've been the established like market leader or second or third, but we can see an opportunity to just really disrupt our industry now. Okay, I don't see any other comments coming in. Okay, good. Let's continue. So let's look at this second area here. So we looked at the first area, which was about just accepting the fact that we're going through uncertainty. The second thing is now, what do we do? So now we've got this mindset that we're going through uncertainty. We know where our team is, either through crisis, recovery, or growth. So what can we do? Especially what can we do for our team? And I reckon one of the most important roles that we have as leaders is to clear the path for our team. So I'm going to, in fact, in this section, I'm going to ask you to share some ideas with other people here in the room as well. But before we do that, let me explain what I mean by clearing the path. And I'll start off with something that people often do unintentionally that does the exact opposite. So when you're going through uncertainty and change, it's very easy, as I said, to make your plans smaller, to make your goals like aim lower, because you can only look so far ahead. And there's these things that I talk about when you're setting up any sort of innovation culture, or you want to build a culture of innovation. Here are some things, and they're a little bit tongue-in-cheek, things that you can do to stop change or stop innovation. Okay, so and some of them you might have said or heard in your teams. In fact, I'm going to ask you, we're going to run a poll soon, and I'm going to ask you, which of these have you heard? And specifically, which of these have you heard since the start of COVID? So we'll get to the poll in a sec, but the sort of things that quite often people in teams say, sometimes the leaders say this as well. It's too expensive, it's not part of your job, our customers won't like it. We tried that once, but it didn't work. Okay, so which of those have you heard people say in your workplace, particularly since the start of COVID? So if you can do that, please, let's do the poll. So the poll question, and by the way, if you have done if you've got the poll open and you've got the previous poll open, you should just be able to open your phone and the new poll question should be there for you. If you haven't, for some reason, if you didn't get in the first time, then again, exactly the same instructions. Go to askgihan.com or scan that QR code and it'll open up the poll for you. Okay, I think most people have done that, so let me just jump to so we can see the poll results as they're happening. Okay, and as you've seen, you can answer more than one here, obviously. Yeah, it's interesting. So this is more spread than I've seen with many other groups. So often when I work with individual organizations, they tend to be clustered around 2 or 3 particular areas. But of course, this is a wide group working across a number of different industries, so that they are clustered. Like a lot of them have come up. So what do we have? So we tried that once. We're too busy. And that would never work here. Yeah, we tried that once. That would never work here, and we're too busy right now. Great. So thank you for taking part in that. I think it's really interesting here that when it's broad, you do get a widespread, which doesn't always happen when you've got a smaller group. Look, the thing is that if you've heard some of those things, and maybe you've even heard them coming out of your own mouth, all of them are legitimate reasons to say we shouldn't try something or we shouldn't take some action. There's some research done at Harvard, and you can read in the Harvard Business Review. Just Google this. There's a paper called "Managers Reject Ideas That Customers Want." It could equally be managers reject ideas that employees want, because what happens is that a customer or a team member has a great idea, and they say they're thinking about, why is this such a great idea? Because it's going to solve a problem. And sometimes they'll even tell you what the solution is. We should do this because it will fix this massive problem. The danger is that as managers and leaders, especially if we're experienced managers and leaders, we quite often, our mind often goes straight to, oh, I know how hard this is going to be. It's going to cost us this money. It's going to cost us this time. I'll have to pull so-and-so off this project to be able to implement that. We'll miss this deadline. I'll have to reevaluate my project plan. So if you're thinking about return on investment, the customers and the employees are thinking about the return, and managers and leaders often think about the investment. There's nothing wrong with thinking about the investment, but often they give it too high a weight. So if you look at those three, the top three were, we tried that once, but it didn't work. So yeah, why would you do it again? Why would we throw good money after bad? Because it already didn't work. What is the next one? That would never work here. Yeah, and generally that's said because you know the culture and you know that how difficult it will be to get that project over the line. What is the other one? We're too busy right now. Absolutely, we're too busy. We've got this tight deadline that we're already struggling to meet, and now you throw this idea out of left field at us and you expect to do that. No, we'll wait till things quieten down. Of course, that never happens. Okay, so all of those might be legitimate reasons for saying no, but they're also reasons that get in the way of us making progress. So the whole, we tried that once, but it didn't work. Sure, it may not have worked in the past in that old environment, but we've got new people, new environment, new customers. Maybe it'll work now, and so on. So I don't use many sporting analogies in my presentations because some people don't like sports, but I'm going to use one here. So by the way, my first sporting love is cricket, but I do like Aussie rules as well. And I'm going to use this idea from Aussie rules. So in Aussie rules, there's this concept called shepherding, which is illegal in some other sports like soccer and hockey, but it has a use in Aussie rules. So let me explain shepherding briefly here. Forget about that. There's 4 people here. Forget about the guy right on the right hand side. Just ignore him. But you can see there's a guy in black. He's got a ball. He's running with the ball, and his mate in the middle is kind of protecting him from his opponent, who's in blue on the left. So the guy in the middle is shepherding. In other words, he's clearing the path for his mate who's got the ball. Okay, like in American football, it's called running interference. And this is a legitimate tactic in Aussie rules. It's expected that all the players will shepherd. In other words, they'll help their teammates to clear a path for them when the opportunity arises. So I reckon one of our most important roles as a leader is to shepherd our team members. So it's not that we take the lead role, it's we go ahead and clear the path for them to do what they're supposed to do. And especially when we've got change and uncertainty and we've got people in our team who are thinking about, they're anxious, they're stressed, they're not quite sure what the future holds, how can you shepherd? How can you create a path for them? In fact, this is a real question. So I'm starting by saying this is a rhetorical question, but there's a lot of intelligence and wisdom in the room. So we're going to break into little groups now, and I'm going to ask you to share, as much as you're willing to share, a situation that you're facing now in your workplace where you've got team members who are perhaps a little bit anxious, stressed, and unsure about the future, and you want to help them, at least take a step into the future. In fact, I'm going to give you a strategy that you can use after this, but in the moment, what you're struggling to know what to do. And you're going to draw on the wisdom of the other people in the room. So the way we're going to do this, I'm going to put you into little groups, and when you share an idea, so we'll have groups of about 4 or 5, and what I'll ask you to do is share a situation that you've got and keep it as confidential as it needs to be. Obviously we're among friends here, but still keep it as confidential as it needs to be. And then the other people in the group can suggest 1 or 2 things. Okay, so I might say I've got a team member and she's just so stressed that she just is, the first hour of her day is not productive. And somebody else might say, Ron might say, you could blah. Something like, you could have a 5-minute phone call with her at the start of every day. Ricky, who's another person here, she might say, you could get her to plan her day the night before. Okay, then in response, I'm allowed to say only one thing. I'm only allowed to say thank you. And then I write down what the suggestions from Ron and Ricky. Okay, only say thank you. I'm not allowed to say, oh, we tried that once, but it wouldn't work. Oh, you don't know her. That would never work for her. I'm only allowed to say thank you. So the idea is that you're going to get ideas from everybody else in the group. We're back. So I hope you got some useful conversations from that, and I hope you got some useful ideas. What happens in this sort of setting is that you're going to get 4 or 5 ideas from different people, and three out of 4 might be completely useless because they don't understand your circumstances and your context. But one of them might be a gem. And every time I've run this, every time I've been a participant in asking people for ideas, I always get 1 or 2 practical things that I can take and actually put into action for myself of solving a problem that I've got. So I hope you got something there. And for the ideas that you think aren't relevant, just keep in mind, just note them anyway, because they may be things that might be useful in the future. Edward de Bono, the late Edward de Bono, you may know that he was famous for creativity and lateral thinking in the 70s, 80s, 90s, which is showing my age. And he said one of the best ways you can get new ideas is to go back through past patents that failed or that weren't accepted, ideas that were considered good, that somebody thought was a good idea, but for whatever reason in the past it wasn't. But maybe you can take it now, shine it out, polish it, and it might be a really valuable idea in the future. Okay, so let's look at this third area. And this third area is actually looking into the future. So how do you, we talked about understanding where you are now, but how do you understand a little bit more about how do you take some first steps into the future, even though we don't exactly know what that future is going to look like. I want to tell you about my 11-year-old niece, Maggie. So she's in year 6, and she's been doing, let me switch to this window here so you can see it. So she's been doing this comic book comic course, right? And she's been doing it on Saturday afternoons, and now their project for the end of first semester was to put together a little book, a booklet, a comic book. And the objective was everyone is told to do a minimum of 8 pages. So you to do an 8-page comic book of your own original drawings. And Maggie, because she works really hard, she went a little bit overboard and she created an 80-page comic book, and it's a choose your own adventure. So what you do is you kind of start off, well, this is the way I thought it was going to work. So you kind of go to page 1, and it says, there's 2 options here, and you can choose whether you go to page 2 or 3. And then based on that, you turn to page 2, and then page 2 might say, you've got 3 options here. So let's go to page 4, 5, or 6. Page 3 might have 2 options, so you go to page 7 or 8, and so on, and you go all the way through, and you end up in any number of different endings. So that's the way I thought the book was going to work, but actually it's not as simple as that. So Maggie says, turn page 1, turn to page 2, and this is all about food. So now it says, are you hungry? And if you say, yes, I am, then you have to turn to page 80. So I have to go all the way over here to go to the next page, and then I say, do you want the salad? Or do you want the chocolate? Well, obviously you want chocolate. So then I have to go all the way back to page 6 and so on. Okay, and I think this is what our life is like now. That is not this nice, simple, orderly, choose some options and then you end up here. You sometimes go page 2, you come back here, then you backtrack here, maybe do a couple of little steps forward, then go way out here again, and then you backtrack. And life is more complicated now, and there is no simple, clear path into the future. So what do? How do we, despite the fact that we've got this jumble of uncertainty now, how do we find our way into the future? And I'm going to share with you one really useful technique that will help you be more decisive. This is a little exercise that I've adapted from this book, Decisive, by the brothers Chip and Dan Heath. And the book is all about research-based strategies for better decision making. It's not specifically about decision making in uncertainty, but I've adapted this little exercise for exactly that purpose. So here's how we do the exercise. I'll talk you through it now, and you can do it now while we're talking, but it's actually useful to know the exercise to then use it yourself and with your team. So the exercise is this, that we might be in uncertainty, crisis, change, disruption. We actually don't know what to do now. So imagine you're right where you are now, and then imagine 3 spots in the future, 3 times in the future. And you're looking for short term, medium term, and long term. So just for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to say my short term is 10 weeks, medium terms 10 months, long terms 10 years. You could choose any numbers. They don't have to be 10, 10, 10. It could be 4 weeks, 6 months, 2 years, whatever you like. But whatever would be short, medium, and long term for you. And then step into, in your imagination, step into each of these 3 time frames. So now some people like to do this, like they just close their eyes. They can imagine stepping into, let's use this time frame of the middle one, 10 months from now. And they close their eyes and imagine it. Some people like to do it physically in the room. So they have these spots in the room and then they walk over to those spots, and that's their imagination. If you're doing both, if you're doing your eyes closed with spots in the room, then make sure that you're not surrounded by sharp objects. But the idea is that you step into them and imagine. So let's use that middle one. So 10 months from now, this is the future you. And imagine that the future you has achieved whatever goal you'd like to achieve. In the case of Maggie's book, I wanted to win the game, but I wanted to win with chocolate, not with salad. So that was like I've achieved that. So what do I feel? What do I see? Who are the people around me? What are they saying? What am I saying? In other words, you've achieved that goal. Now here's the thing. Then you look back, that future you looks back to the you 10 months ago and says, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful for the decisions you made and the actions you took 10 months ago that got me and us to where we are now. Then ask yourself, have a look, this in your imagination. What are the decisions you made and what are the actions that you took that day, in other words, today, that will move you in the direction of achieving the goal that you want 10 months from now. So it's a pretty simple process. And I've run this with a number of groups, and it's very easy to do. The most common question that I get asked is, how do you know that they're going to tell you the right, like you're going to come up with the right decisions and actions? And actually that's not even the right question to ask, because it doesn't make sense. Every decision that you make, every action that you take is like turning a page of this book. It is going to take you somewhere. And all you're doing is giving yourself a better chance that is going to take you in the direction that you think is going to be useful for you. Okay, so I hope you find that a really useful tool to use right now to help get unstuck. It just gets you into motion, it gets you into action. Okay, so just to finish off, we talked about these 3 things. We talked about you accepting uncertainty, being able to identify where people are in terms of crisis, recovery, and growth. We looked at clearing the path for your team members and the people around you as the leader to be the one who shepherds and clears the path for them to do what they're required to do. And then looking into the future, how do you look into the future and see into the future using that technique of projecting into the future and then deciding what you're going to do now that will help you move in that direction. Just one last thing, I've set up this I still do lots of keynote presentations, either in person in Western Australia or online, like all around the world now at the moment. But sometimes people don't necessarily have a big event, but they want me to do something for their teams. And especially now where you've got online meetings, but it doesn't only have to be online. So I've set up this new product, which is just a series of 10 to 15 minute presentations. Some of the sort of stuff you had today, but not extended over 45 to 50 minutes. So there are these little presentations which are pre-recorded, so you can play them in your team meetings. You can play them in a Zoom or a Teams meeting, or even in a boardroom, just play it on the TV at the front of the room. And I've also got a little facilitator's worksheet for you as a leader if you then want to ask some questions of the team and have a little bit of a discussion around the topic that we've covered. And I've picked 6 of them here. There are 10 of them on the website at the moment, and I'm going to keep adding to them. So there's one around being a possibility thinker, the mindset for the future. There's one about being an active learner. There's one about leading with empathy. And there's a few others there. You can find them all at bestworkplace.com.au. And because most of Australia at the moment is going through lockdown, I've got a special 50% discount if you use that coupon code, COVID50, anytime you buy any one of those. So so they're available at the moment and there's no expiry on them. So if you want to buy them now and hold on to them for later when you might use them, so you can roll them out over, there's 10 of them. So if you buy all 10, you could roll them out over 10 weeks or 10 months. That's okay. You can buy them now and you have access to them forever. So that's it from me. I'm just quickly checking if there's any other comments. Rachel says, well done, Maggie. It is brilliant. And it is brilliant. Maggie's a really hard worker, and she does have that as she's a very interested person. She's interested in a lot of things, which is, I think, a really positive attribute to have. And she puts a lot of work in as well. And okay, I'm biased because I'm a proud uncle, but that is true. Ricky says, thank you. So my last message is, don't wait for all your ducks to line up in a row. Don't wait for things to be perfect. 2020 and 21 have taught us anything. It's just that we can't rely on waiting for the world to be perfect. Start before you're ready and take action now. Thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks for participating, and thanks for helping each other out as well. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the future. Bye for now.